Creating conditions to put yourself at the top of a game that everyone is required to play exposes the hubris that capitalists hold in their ideologies that they enact. And I will show you why through the video game Bioshock. In the world of Bioshock, we will explore why Andrew Ryan is the most crystallized form of a fictional hyper-capitalist to use as an example for this sort of discussion. But I really just wanted to make a video about Bioshock and really just how their political, social, and economic structures are kind of set up. And that is to say, I think they're all connected, and I think it all stems downwards from creating a society that only holds private wealth and private interests. There's no collective good or need, and I believe ultimately that's a capitalist downfall. I'm using Bioshock as an example to reinforce why collectivism is actually preferable to unchecked hoarding of private resources.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
This would-be utopia had flaws, most of which were apparent very early on. In Rapture's purely capitalistic society, there were no public services. Everything within was privately owned and hence came at a price. This included the city's food, healthcare, sanitation, and even its oxygen supply and clean water supplies. Even police and fire departments were subscription-based services such as Papadopoulos, did I say that right? Papadopoulos Police Department and Fontaine firefighters, with the legal right to turn down any request for aid from those who had not paid for their services. With no restrictions on business and labor, there was nothing to hold men back and save competition and the customer's choice. This allowed many industries to flourish at first, but also led to unscrupulous, dangerous business practices, such as extortion or exorbitantly expensive prices at stores. So what does this passage mean? I think it really just means you can't trust people that hold private wealth to provide a service for the benefit of the service. I think this perfectly encapsulates a capitalistic mindset with which you have private capital that you can exert power over people with. So you do, because I do understand that you can have a quote-unquote legal right to turn down aid for a service that everybody needs. Sure, you might have the legal right. How the fuck does that help anybody? Who does that help, actually? It's the private wealth owners, which in my estimation is the problem of creating a society like Rapture, a purely capitalistic one. I mean, look at the outcome. The original goal of Rapture was to create a laissez-faire society, free from religious and government interference of any kind, where any citizen could prosper for their own gain without being hindered by the needs of others. This is the part where I keep finding great hubris in the way that like capitalist mindsets think, without being hindered by the needs of others. It's really like these people do not realize that you cannot live in a society individually. Like, we live in a society of humans because we need more than just us to accomplish things. So the fact that Andrew Ryan tried to create a society based on the principle of laissez-faire, free from interference, and then not making an attempt to have a social safety net, because if you have a capitalist society that hoards wealth privately, whether to create services or goods, at some point that wealth is going to continue to consolidate into that class of people, creating a class society. And guess who has the, I guess, worst outcome when it comes to a purely capitalist society? People that don't have assets or capital. So I just find it to have such great hubris for quote-unquote great men like this that have such quote-unquote great ideas. And in reality, they're so naive and so hyper-individualistic, which makes sense given the background of this character and the society in real life with which he was born from. The Great Chain is an allegorical term coined by Andrew Ryan to describe his view of the market and its evolution, especially within Rapture. According to his ideal, each worker and consumer influences the economy through his or her natural endeavors to produce, buy, and sell. The combined actions of all participants in the economy create a relatively unified movement. Thus, every individual is a quote-unquote link in this great chain of industry, pulling it upward simply by acting in their own self-interests. I think this term, the Great Chain, as it's presented in the wiki and the the universe with which this character and the society exist in, I find the Great Chain as an economic mode of production to be, I mean, just a capitalist wet dream. Like, this is what they all want, but can never achieve, is this what do they call it? Influencing the economy through natural endeavors to produce, buy, and sell. I agree that is needed for a healthy functioning society. The problem is a capitalist think that needs to happen, or that should happen with private wealth, or just wealth in general. And the people that have the wealth should be the ones dictating the society or industries inside of that society. And I find that, in a word, abhorrent. It's so selfish and self-centered, and again, doesn't holistically look at the needs of all people. It just looks at what they can provide and what prospects they could have based on where they are. But if this is again, great hubris in a capitalist mindset, if you're not creating conditions that allow everybody to have an equitable start, you're always going to have divisions amongst humans. And when you have a purely capitalistic society where wealth continues to head upwards and be hoarded there, you create a class of humans that think that they have the right to dictate society because they have wealth, which they've determined to be a form of success. So I do agree with like the portion of this ideal that says, hey, we should enable people to influence an economy through their natural endeavors. I agree. We don't have to pigeonhole those natural endeavors into things that specifically the market wants or needs to make money. We need to enable people to have this natural endeavor to do what they give a shit about, to provide what they can to society. And if everybody provides what they can to society, without this underlying need to produce surplus capital to make trades on it, to have profit, we just don't need more hyper-individualism through capitalism. It is only going to further divide us, to create, to further entrench our class society. And I think men like this, especially Andrew Ryan, are just some of the worst humans that can ever exist, frankly. They experience a hardship, which I think we can all relate to. A hardship. Something bad's going to happen to you, sure. Andrew Ryan took the hardship and just said, I'm going to be an individual because I guess I can't rely on anyone else. Which I understand the perspective that leads someone to get to that conclusion. And I also find it to be very short-sighted and naive to land at that solution and just stay there. For a time, Ryan's ideals held true. Free from all economic and ethical restrictions, Rapture became a place of innovation and entrepreneurship. Technology decades or even centuries ahead of the surface worlds became commonplace in the city, and seemingly impossible wonders such as a geothermal power station, a self-sustaining biosphere, and a gene-based supercomputer became reality. In these early stages, Rapture prospered, and the Great Chain held strong. This is what capitalism can bring in an early stage where its capital is used as a productive force to bootstrap or kickstart an industry that someone wants to, I guess, have an existence, be in charge of, what have you. But in the early stages, this is how it always happens. You have capital to innovate and do entrepreneurship, which is wonderful, but it stagnates at a certain point. Capitalism ultimately wants to use its capital to accrue more capital by using the least amount of it. And I think that will manifest itself in the situation of refusing services based on whether or not you paid for, like refusing what we would consider a public service in today's society as a private one. It's a really good juxtaposition to show you the mindset of how people with private capital want to operate. They want the most amount of capital for the least amount of work. Or, yes, they want the worker to work as much as possible while paying them the least. And I think that's perfectly exemplified in the same industry where you are refusing service. Because why else would you refuse service? Because you want to save money. It's really as simple as that. It's disgusting and abhorrent, but it's not a hard perspective to understand. As Andrew Ryan took on dictatorial powers, the Great Chain, his economic philosophy, already a shadow of its former shape, lost its purpose. Ryan gradually denigrated into what he hated most, a tyrant, personally driving the course of a largely shattered economy in the midst of a war. The Civil War with Atlas left a solution where Ryan's ideals were a liability. In the Rapture bank crash, the Rapture dollar lost its worth as people scrambled to just survive the carnage. Monetary exchanges lost all meaning, so the city's crazed inhabitants, splicers in this case, resorted to Atom, the source of all the plasmid and gene tonic related powers in the gameplay proper, for currency. As chaos increased, the city struggled to produce basic resources as it was unsafe for citizens to even go to work, and many people resorted to theft and violence. In desperation, Ryan took control of the crazed populace, their very will, to the end of fighting and destruction. With Ryan's death, the chances of Rapture again being run using its original ideals grew remote. Eroded by a calamitous environment it was not designed for, the Great Chain no longer functioned, instead giving way to the concept of collectivism, the antithesis of Ryan's ideals. And this is why capitalists are very, very insidious. They will not hesitate to see their political power dwindling away, and then they will grab onto the levers of political power they can exert through their private capital, which is, again, something a man like Andrew Ryan said he would never do because he didn't want to be a tyrant, because he saw how that works in America, and he did it anyway. Because these capitalists fundamentally are brain broken. They cannot help but see private profit, that ability for the comfort they seem to be wanting to clamor for. That is more important than serving human life, literally. The proof is in the pudding of his actions, and again, in the ideal he strove to enact, the great chain. He literally hates collectivism, which again isn't surprising when you have to privatize your wealth, to lack of a better word, hoard it from everyone. So maybe he was always a tyrant, and he just needed the right conditions to unlock his full potential. Who's to say? Maybe it was a facade the entire time. Maybe he wanted this power, and he really just wanted the private capital productive force to build up the capital to maybe exert it at a later date. Or maybe he never wanted to do this, and the conditions that were created by the great chain were something he truly could not foresee. It's really hard to tell. The point I'm trying to make is people with private wealth, if they can, no matter at what class status, they will try to exert that power politically. And that is the most dangerous formation of society of humans that we could ever muster. Ryan himself was forced to abandon some of his own ideals in his battle against Fontaine to save Rapture. Though initially willing to play by the rules he set himself, and with an assumption that required minimized city regulation, Ryan gradually resorted to more coercive tactics as he employed Sullivan and his security force to eliminate the threat of Fontaine's crime ring. After Fontaine's death, Ryan nationalized Fontaine Futuristics to maintain the stability of Adam-addicted population, betraying his own ideology and the trust of his closest friend, Bill McDonough. Capitalists will always go back or never have ideals in the first place. They will always want to use their power to exert their individual will through political private wealth. This becomes problematic when you allow that to amass unabated, which makes sense, I think, when you look at the way that this Rapture was constructed. It was constructed to have no restrictions. And you might think in a quote-unquote free society, no restrictions is good. I, however, would push back and say, I think no restrictions is good if we have a certain baseline of human, kindness, compassion, something where we know humans are going to go to bat for each other instead of be hyper individual. That's why this entire society that was created in Rapture is, in my personal opinion, just doomed to fail from the start. The writing was on the wall. What am I trying to say here? Why am I telling you this? I need you to understand that capitalism is only going to save those that have capital. Also only going to reinforce the rights and quote-unquote liberties that people that have capital or business corporations that have capital in this society. Those are the entities that have the most rights, just flatly. You as an average worker or whatever you do on the daily, a student, whatever, if you do not own a specific amount of capital, you are not in the ruling class, therefore you are subjugated by them. That is what I need you to understand. Basically, capitalism bad. A bit reductive, but on the nose. And then you could ask, well, why is capitalism bad? Just because it's presented awfully in a video game doesn't mean it's a bad economic system. And I would say, no, not inherently on its own, but all we have to do is look throughout history to see just how everyday average people are treated under that economic mode. Yes, maybe they get treated better than certain other ones, but the point is we are a developed enough society as humans that we can find a way to not have to cast away one identity to save another. It's not a zero-sum game. We can figure it out. And capitalism has to keep telling you that you can't figure it out and that somebody always has to lose, because to them, they're the ones that are making people lose by exploiting them. Those people are your enemy. Capitalism is bad though, and I know I've harped on it enough, but the point needs to be made that it is simply bad because it hoards wealth in the smallest amount of hands who have the most amount of power. That is not you or me if you're watching this video, and that should scare the hell out of you.